Without doubt, one of the most impactful images of Prince Philip's funeral last night, and again repeated in the early hours of this morning, is the image of Her Majesty sitting by herself. A place that is saved for the sovereign, but due to COVID restrictions, and obviously the reason for the occasion, no one was sitting next to her, let alone behind her, let alone really anywhere near her. It's one of those images that just reminds us that yes, as regal, as important as a figure like the Queen could be, loneliness follows most deaths, and death, of course, is coming for us all. The funeral in and of itself, I've got to say, was beautiful. Maybe because of its starkness, maybe because it was just 30 members of the most intimate part of the Duke's family. It meant that the pomp and circumstance, even in a scaled down sense, really stood out. That image as his coffin was being lowered into the ground, when a soul bagpiper was playing, was magnificent staging, but also really deep meaning. The beautiful use of those 4 members of a choir that were able to fill a big cavernous space that had been around for hundreds of years. It truly was a beautiful thing to sit and watch. Also too was, as his coffin was being brought into the chapel, there was a minute's silence that was commemorated all over the UK and right the way throughout the Commonwealth. Literally, members of the public who didn't have the chance to line a parade route out the front of Windsor Castle like they had a couple of years ago for Meghan and Harry's wedding, they just paused. Simple people standing still for a second for a bloke they probably never met, but a bloke that they respected, if for no other reason than because of his proximity to a woman who is so deeply loved. In the coming years, we no doubt will get more and more updates about the Queen's health, and then there will be a day where we have to deal with her not being here either. We got a preview in the past 24 hours about just how deep that wound is going to cut. As I said, the most impactful moments for me were those ones of the lone bagpiper, but then also just the simplicity of all of those regal titles being said for the last time before his body, in its coffin, would never be seen again.
Grand Master and Knight Grand Cross of the Most Excellent Order of the British Empire, Lord High Admiral of the United Kingdom, one of Her Majesty's Most Honourable Privy Council, Admiral of the Fleet, Field Marshal in the Army, and Marshal of the Royal Air Force, husband of Her Most Excellent Majesty Elizabeth II, by the grace of God, of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, and of her other realms and territories, Queen, head of the Commonwealth, defender of the faith, sovereign of the most noble order of the Garter, whom may God preserve and bless with long life, health and honour, and all worldly happiness.
Now, of course, there are the absolute hardcores who don't quite understand why anyone in Australia would care. But there are those of us who understand that one of the reasons that we care, that we watched, that we talked about it so much, is because almost everything that you just saw before you, literally the wood that lines the walls, to the different patterns on the flags, or where people sit or stand or don't, has meaning. And it has meaning that goes back a very long period of time. And in a world where everything is obsolete, where the expectation of even some of the most expensive things you will ever buy is they're kind of flicked within 5 to 10 years, to see something that has a continuum across hundreds of years and generations is a wonderful reminder to us about the reality of life. I talk about this a lot, which is that there's sort of one continuous chain and we get to add a link to it. But the whole point is we don't get to exist unless there has been those before us, and the future is impossible without us setting it up. No doubt the glossy magazines, they will focus, if not on the image of Her Majesty, they will focus on the fact that for just but a brief few moments, we got to see brothers that we've heard so much about actually having a chat. Now, who knows whether they were saying, yeah, nice funeral, Pop would have liked that. How's Nan doing? Cool. How are your kids? I don't know. But maybe there was a chance at a 5-minute deep and meaningful, and maybe when, because there was, yes, the eyes of the world upon them, but still just a nice little moment where, and anyone who's had a little bit of fracture in the family, there is something about being able to look somebody in the eye, and it starts to thaw the ice. I hope that happens in the next little while. But also one of the reasons why this funeral, I think, is particularly important for millions of people around the world to have seen, is that the experience that the most regal of families went through in the past 24 hours is one that hundreds of thousands of people have gone through around the world, where we have been told that you can only have 10 people at your funeral when your family might be way bigger than 10 people. From the United States to here in Australia, limited funeral sizes is something that we have got very used to. It's something that was one of the last restrictions to disappear. And while the vast majority of people were worried about whether they could stand or sit in a pub, if you are one of those that have lost someone in the past 12 months, and I'm talking not just COVID, but all the reasons that we lose people, there is something really unfair about the past 12 months. And really unfair about the opportunity to celebrate those lives that has been lost, that has been stolen from us. In fact, I checked just a couple of seconds before we came on the air, and 141,000 people in Australia died last year. For all that focus on about 1,000 people who had died of COVID, there were 140,000 people whose funerals were limited, whose families had to compromise, whose farewell was not the one that it deserved. So if you're one of those families that had to have a smaller than acceptable service, where you had to watch someone that you grew up with or that you loved with your entire soul being farewelled via the internet, I just want to say strength and love to all of you. And as things get better when it comes to COVID, we have the opportunity not just to stand up and drink, not just to go to the footy, but also to be able to farewell and honour the most important people in our world, our mates and our family members.